Can Syria fulfill its promise? Can Syria fulfill its promises? After the fall of Assad last December, the new masters of Damascus convening a one-day national dialogue conference. On paper, the conclusions seem great. Transitional justice, inclusive democracy, the disarming of the country's myriad of militias in favor of a single national army. In practice, well, not so simple. The North's US-backed Syrian Kurds say they feel left out. In fact, they were not invited. They say they're not about to give up their guns. They have to fight both remnants of ISIS and Turkey-backed militias, bringing them into the fold, building trust with the Islamist-led factions that propelled Ahmed al-Shaara to power won't happen overnight. We'll ask how and how far the West will go after the lifting of EU sanctions. With Israel's bombing raids and its insistence that Syria's military move further from the Golan Heights, how to support stability and peace in a nation that wants it so badly. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Syria's promise. And joining us from Damascus, he took part in that national dialogue on Tuesday. Fadi Haliso, co-founder of the Syrian refugee-led development organization Basme and Zetoune. Welcome to the France 24 debate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Franco-Syrian activist Jade Kahale is with us as well. Good to see you.
Good evening.
From Beirut, Adnan Nasser, correspondent for Azerbaijan news channel A News and contributor to the news website Al Monitor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And from Barcelona, Julian Barnes-Dacey, director of the Middle East North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations think tank. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
You can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. If it's Wednesday, it must be Amman, the King of Jordan, welcoming Syria's interim president, who's been making the rounds of regional capitals. Abdullah and Ahmed al-Shaara talking up border security and stability this one day after that national dialogue in Damascus. More on that with Charlotte Lamb.
Syria's interim president, before his country promising a democratic political transition. Just months after leading the rebel alliance that toppled the Assad regime.
Today is an exceptional, historic and rare opportunity. We must take advantage of every moment of it to serve the interests of our people.
This national dialogue, one of the pledges by the rebels turned rulers set to chart Syria's political future. Armed groups in attendance vowing to disband and join a new army.
The unity of arms and its monopoly by the state is not a luxury, but a duty and an obligation. Syria does not accept division.
Plans for the one-day conference were seemingly thrown together at the last minute. Critics say this casts doubt on whether the summit will actually aid the political process.
The situation is that the slogans are one thing and the reality on the ground is another. Why should we care about the national conference when the most important things, security and safety, unfortunately remain absent?
But inside the presidential palace in the country's capital, only relief and anticipation. As the interim president leaves the stage, this woman shouts, "Thank God, the palace has returned to the people." Notably absent, the country's minority communities, many unconvinced by the promise of an inclusive government and what that could entail. Organisers say recommendations from the summit will shape a constitutional declaration, just days before a new transitional government takes power on March 1st.
Fadi Haliso, when you came out of the meeting, again, you heard at the tail end of that report, minorities absent Tuesday in Damascus. When you came out of it, did you feel heartened or skeptical?
Dialogue as it went was a bit a disappointment for many of us Syrian activists who were involved in the last 14 years in the fight for a new democracy in Syria. A rushed conference like this has its limitations, of course, but what we were hoping for was a long process of dialogue that the country needs a lot for healing. I can't say that I am totally disappointed meeting as Syrians and discussing our concerns publicly like this is, of course, a big move toward the future from what we were at 3 months ago. What we hope for is that this could be the first step into a long process of dialogue. We hope that the recommendation that were issued by the different committees will be taken seriously and will be discussed furthermore in future months. The only concern we have is that so far there is no commitment from the current authorities about how it is going to deal with this recommendation, or whether there will be a continuation to this dialogue in the coming months. I understand the need to rush things off, especially that we are hearing that a new government will be formed in the next few days to be able to lead the whole rebuilding of the country and the negotiation with the international community about funding that is needed for the country, the lifting of sanctions. But all of these are legitimate reasons to act fast, but I don't think they justify rushing national dialogue in just 8 hours like this. So our hope is that this will be just a first step for a long-awaited process.
And you can confirm to us the Kurdish authorities from the north not represented. And did you see, for instance, when you look at minorities, for instance, any Alawites, the group of the ousted Bashar al-Assad?
I think there is here we need to clear things out. All of the invitations were sent to people based individually, not based on their political affiliation, and this is another layer of complexity when dealing with these new authorities. There have been Kurds present, but not the authorities in the northeast as per se. There were Alawites presented, of course, in the conference. I don't have any idea about the numbers, but I knew few persons there who are from Alawite origin. I am a Christian myself, and I saw a big number of Christians there, whether religious leaders or just secular citizens. So I think the big absence was for people with special needs. They weren't represented enough. But I think all the representation issue is not the big concern. A rushed conference that was announced just 48 hours before it took place. Of course, there will be a lot of forgotten and misrepresented people and components of the Syrian society. And these are the reasons why we were concerned at the first place about the way it was organized.
Jade Khaled, Rome wasn't built in a day, neither was Damascus. So your thoughts? We knew a one-day conference wasn't going to solve everything, but your thoughts on what happened on Tuesday?
I mean, of course, I don't have as much information as Fadi, who was there. But I mean, what I've heard discussing with many Syrian friends, activists, civil society workers, etc., it was indeed organized very much short notice. People, I mean, I know very, very, very good people who should have been there who couldn't because they were invited literally 24 hours before. So that was quite a shame. But I mean, I think still it's a first of its kind. And I think it's a positive thing that there will be other dialogues. That's what I understood, that there will be other sessions like that in the future. And I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't think, I mean, since they are inviting people as individuals and not groups, I think it's important to dissociate Kurdish like Syrian Democratic Forces representatives or authorities and Kurdish people. I mean, I understand that there were some individuals who were present. It's just that groups were not invited as such in the...
And there's going to be a committee to draft a constitution. You heard Fadi express worry that they're a bit hazy on specifics as to what the deadlines are and when things happen and who gets to make any final calls on this. But this issue of what kind of constitution is, of course, the crux of the matter. The Kurds want a federal system. Damascus wants a more centralized one.
I mean, as far as I understand, there was an agreement that was reached last week between SDF and the interim government of Syria. And actually, SDF has agreed to integrate the Syrian government and to integrate its military forces and institutions into the government. So I think it's going in the right way, I assume. It's been weeks now that they have been trying to find some deals, and I think it's actually starting to take shape, as far as I understand.
On that point, Adnan Nasser, you went to Syria after the fall of Assad. How far along is Syria in trying to bring everyone together at this particular point in time, particularly since we heard on Tuesday that emphatic call that everyone has to lay down their weapons, the use of force is solely limited to the national army?
I think it's important for the President Ahmed al-Shaara to relay this message to the Syrian people, to letting them know that the days of militias are over and that the days of violence are over. Now, the devil is in the details. Many local Syrians that I've spoken to are looking forward to a day where all Syrians can unite under one banner. But they are concerned of this new government that's taking an Islamist face. Consider the fact that Syria is a majority secular society, regardless of religious creeds or political dispositions. Many locals in Damascus who I had spoken to are happy that the former regime of Bashar al-Assad, the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, is gone. But they're still concerned about what shape their new Syria is going to take. I had spoken to a few locals when I was there, when I went to the old souk of Damascus. A lot of them had said to me, Adnan, I'm supposed to feel freer now than before, and yet I still can't say how I really feel about many of these people coming from the Idlib, obviously the northern part of Syria, the province where Ahmed al-Shaara was fighting the forces of Bashar al-Assad. They feel there is a kind of almost silent threat, or there's this passive aggressiveness from certain forces that had arrived to Damascus to govern them. But I think slowly but surely with time, if Ahmed al-Shaara makes the right directions, I mean, this conference, I think, was a good one, but it was sloppily done because it was only one day. I think his priorities now are to have the sanctions removed so that there can be more foreign trade and investments coming in. And he wants to make sure that he has positive relations with all of his neighbors, not just a domestic unity, but that has to be his priority.
Yeah, and he's recently been to Turkey. He has Turkey, whose leadership supports militias that are shooting at the Kurdish-led SDF in the north of the country. So again, it's the question of how does he navigate that tightrope?
It's still early to tell, but I think it was really a mistake to not invite the SDF to this conference officially. As your other guest pointed out, that individuals were invited, but I think he should have made a stand and said, look, I agree that the Kurdish community is a vital part of the Syrian society. He had said that last month, if I'm not mistaken. He should have taken actions to meet those words. So he still has a long way to go.
Still a long way to go. Tensions then between the SDF and the central government in Damascus. And yet, over the weekend, came the first public acknowledgement of internal oil deliveries from the northeast, which is under the SDF control, to the rest of the country. The deal involved sending 5,000 barrels a day of crude from Deir el-Zor province to a refinery in Homs.
We have around 200 tankers heading to the Ramallah oil fields to load and transfer the oil to Homs and the refinery. We call for an agreement. The fees are not suitable for the drivers.
They want the drivers want better pay. Julian Barnes-Dacey, your thoughts, because there's an example of where it is working, it seems, between the SDF and the central government.
Well, look, I think there are slow steps to build bridges here. Dialogue is ongoing. As one of your other guests mentioned, there was some talk of an agreement being reached last week between the SDF, the Kurds, and Damascus. I'm not quite sure if that was official or not and how far that actually went. But I think on the one hand, there is this negotiation underway to try and reach a settlement whereby the two sides can come together. At the same time, the Kurds do find themselves squeezed, much more cornered and under pressure than they've ever been. And I think it's clear that kind of wider Syrian public opinion is against them. And there's a sense that they are sitting on Syrian national oil reserves, which all should be going towards Damascus. They face a the Turks are sitting in a pretty precarious situation here. They are under pressure to reach an agreement, and it doesn't look like Damascus is going to fold their way. So really, I think the question is, to what extent are the Kurds willing to integrate themselves, and can a cooperative pathway be forged that averts the possibility of conflict, whether between the Kurds and Damascus or between the Kurds and Turkey, which would obviously have wider destabilizing implications.
And Julian, the SDF has a big backer in the name of the United States. Is that going to continue under the Trump administration?
Well, I think that the US position is a huge unknown hanging over Syria right now. We just don't know if Trump knows where Syria is on the map, let alone cares about the future of the country. We've heard that he's interested and wants to pull troops out of Syria. That would obviously leave the Kurds quite dramatically exposed, given that they've acted as the key force protection to the Kurds. We know that Turkey and the US could have a good relationship under Trump and Erdogan. So we really don't know what way this is going to play and the extent to which kind of internal pressures in the US to stay loyal to the Kurds to prevent a new outbreak of ISIS cells will keep the Americans plugged in. Obviously, the other big question hanging over Syria as it relates to the US is the question of sanctions. And the US holds immense leverage over Damascus right now because of the power of US sanctions, which are really having quite a dramatic and ongoing debilitating effect to provide economic openings from both the international community and more pertinently regional states right now.
And there's another player in all of this. After recently visiting the Turkish capital, the Russian foreign minister on Tuesday in Tehran, Sergei Lavrov, clearly seemed to be siding against the SDF in its push for federalism without mentioning them by name.
Syria's territorial integrity is of principal importance. Any attempts to push certain regions of the country towards separatism, which took place in recent years, are totally unacceptable and extremely dangerous.
Now, Adnan Nasser, if you haven't followed the news this week, there's a warming of ties between Russia and the United States. Lavrov's, what he's stating there, what's it all about?
Yes, I have been following the news quite closely. It's interesting to see where we are now in this era between Donald Trump and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. But I want to focus a little bit on on the Syria question. I don't say that the Russians would want to alienate the Kurds. Far from it. They want to be seen as a good friend to all, as it were, in the Middle East. But the Russians want to maintain warm and positive relations with the new central government in Damascus, or the interim government in Damascus. As far as I'm aware, they've also sent freshly printed Syrian currency from Russia to the Syrian government as an act of goodwill. And let's not forget that the Russians also have excellent relations, as far as I'm concerned, they're excellent relations with Ankara. And both Ankara and Damascus seem to be on similar sides regarding the question of federalism and Syria's territorial integrity. So Russia, I think, is slowly but surely will pick the side of Damascus.
Yeah, even though Russia's ally Iran's been pushed to the side since the fall of Assad, Russia's still hoping to keep its only warm water naval and air bases on the Mediterranean coast of northwest Syria. Fadi Haliso, your thoughts on at this point in time on where it all goes in terms of how the new masters of Damascus play the United States and play relations with Russia when it comes to all these issues?
I think the new government is finding itself in a very precarious situation. On one hand, the country is struggling economically. There are a lot of pressing issues that need to be dealt with. And this is why I think, although a lot of Syrians feel that Russia was part of the killing machine that targeted them, the new government can't afford to alienate any possible allies in the future. So they are walking a very thin line between maintaining this a good relationship with Russia, trying to present a good and acceptable face to the Americans. And from what I understand, the new government that is going to be formed in the few days is aimed at presenting a new inclusive face of the government of Syria, so that this could convince the American of lifting the sanctions. So far, what we have seen from the Biden administration was a temporary lift for 6 months. This has done no good at all to the Syrian economy. No banks, international banks, will deal with Syria with such a temporary lift of sanctions. So what we need, and the country really needs a serious move towards lifting the sanctions, towards funding reconstruction, funding very crucial sectors in the country that without such funding, the whole country will keep struggling and social tensions will keep arising everywhere. Electricity, the power sector is one that needs special consideration, and this is a sector that couldn't be reconstructed without the lifting of sanctions. We need big investment here. We need big companies to come to Syria and whether renovate the old power implants, or build new ones. Without electricity, so far the electricity is coming to people's for a few hours per day, which is not enough for any industry to take off, for anything else to operate. So these are big concerns for the Syrian people. The government is very aware that no serious movement from the international community to fund what Syria needs will happen without the American approval. And we are seeing this, the UN, from its appeal for emergency appeal for Syria after the regime fell, which targeted to raise 1.3 billion, has only managed to raise 120 million in 3 months, which is nothing. It is not even enough to operate the most basic operations for emergency that are needed on the ground. So big actions are needed, and I think this is not an easy task. What we hope to see in the few coming days is a really inclusive government that can convince the international community that this is a new Syria that is willing and open to cooperate with the world, with the international community, that has left the old regime far away, and the old tradition of confronting all the international powers.
Yeah, and at Tuesday's National Dialogue Conference, participants again discussed a path to a new constitution, according to the interim president, the creation of a, quote, transitional justice body to restore the people's rights. On that score, when EU foreign ministers on Monday in Brussels agreed on easing sanctions on Syria's energy and the transport and banking sectors, the kind of easing of sanctions our panel's been talking about, the announcement came with conditions.
We know that Syria is a very diverse country with many groups, and we are keeping a very close eye on this and close contact also with the regional actors. If everything does not go right, then we are also ready to put the sanctions back.
Your thoughts on this easing of sanctions by the European Union and the weight, as we heard the other panelists say, Jade Gale, for the United States to do the same?
I think it's a very positive thing to ease the sanctions, because right now the country definitely needs to rebuild, and you cannot restore anything if you don't have fuel, if you don't have electricity, if you don't have oil, gas, etc. So, I mean, it's a prerequisite to any...
And the EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, is that the right tone to strike? We can always take those... that easing of sanctions back if you don't fulfill your promises?
I mean, it's the only leverage, I guess, we have. So I kind of understand. To be very honest, maybe not the tone, but in principle, it's, I think, understandable that there needs to be a leverage to ensure that certain conditions are met within the next months.
Julian Barnes-Dacey, you heard earlier Fadi Haliso say that right now, assistance from the international community is well below what was promised. The mood right now, with the U.S. retreating on the world stage, is not towards more international aid. Your thoughts on what Europe is doing and should be doing?
So I absolutely agree with the acute and desperate needs on the ground. I spent last week in Syria, and really the economy is in a desperate state, and I think that is feeding security concerns, and the wider situation is deteriorating outside of Damascus. So there really is a need to kind of inject more support into Syria to provide the stabilization and the breathing space for the political process to move forward. It's all fine and well talking about the need for inclusion and democracy and accountability, but unless you have the foundations for people to survive and get on with their lives, it's very hard to imagine those taking root. So I do think there is an urgency to do more at the moment. Unfortunately, US sanctions are proving to be a massive blockage. For instance, you had initial promises of Qatari funding going in to support the new system. That has not happened, and I think one of the key obstacles in Doha has been precisely the continued existence of US sanctions and an unwillingness to challenge the Trump line. The Europeans have lifted sanctions now, but that isn't going to do much without accompanying US measures, and the Europeans aren't putting the kind of direct assistance on the table that I think is needed. And Fadi mentioned the lack of funding to the humanitarian appeals. That is a really acute situation. 90% of the population living under the poverty line, hunger, famine, these are all pressing acutely on the situation. I think we should be very concerned, and suddenly Europeans who live alongside Syria in the Mediterranean, who've suffered the challenges associated with migration and terrorism, need to be stepping up here with greater assistance and more immediately.
We've talked about it in previous shows since the fall of Assad, Julian, with the pushing out of Iran's influence. It's a moment in time. The U.S. doesn't want to seize upon it?
Well, it seems that the U.S. frankly just wants out of the Middle East. The U.S. is not particularly interested, more so than ever under Trump, in playing a role there. We see them pulling out of Europe. We see them pulling out of the Middle East. Trump wants to focus on internal issues and on Asia and China and so forth. So this is not going to be an issue that the Americans solve. They're cutting U.S. aid budgets. They're retreating from the region. This is, I think, an issue, a country that regional states, Arab Gulf states, its neighbors, and the likes of the Europeans are going to have to step up and offer greater support.
Julian, but even if they're isolationists, they still have an anti-Iran streak running through them in this Trump administration.
Sure, they do, but I don't think Trump has enough of an anti-Iran streak in him to want to commit troops and resources to Syria. And I think if he gets a message from the Israelis that they can handle this militarily, and we saw an escalation of their bombing campaign just yesterday across Syria, southern Syria, and statements last night saying that the Syrians could not put their security forces south of Damascus, then I think Trump will be fine to say, look, let the Israelis handle this. This is, Iran is their problem in the region, not ours. You may have others in the American system saying, look, this is a strategic opportunity. We can cement Iran's weakening here. But that does not seem to be resonating with Trump, who's talking about weakening Iran as much as he's talking about trying to make a deal with Iran.
Yeah, and you mentioned those Israeli strikes, at least 2 killed after the targeting of military sites on Tuesday southwest of Damascus. The strikes in Daraa province reportedly hitting Tel al-Shaara, that's a strategic hilltop overlooking large parts of the Golan Heights and northern Israel. This follows just a few days ago Benjamin Netanyahu's warning to Syria.
We will not allow forces of the HTS or the new Syrian army to enter the territory south of Damascus. We demand full demilitarization of southern Syria in the provinces of Quneitra, Daraa and Suwaida from the new regime's forces. In addition, we will not tolerate any threat to the Druze sect in southern Syria.
And then Nasser, what does your crystal ball tell you? You heard Julian there just say how perhaps the Trump administration will simply outsource whatever happens in Syria to Israel. Do you see that happening?
Well, we should never try to predict anything when it comes to the Middle East or anywhere on the geopolitical map entirely. You have to keep something in mind. I think it was a strategic mistake and a tactical blunder on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu to occupy these parts of Syria so quickly. Let's consider something right now. The Bashar al-Assad government is gone. The influence of Iran has been depleted, and immediately the new interim government had quickly stepped in to block any arms going into Lebanon, which would have gone to Hezbollah, which is an ally of Iran and an ally that had protected Bashar al-Assad for these 14 years. And how does Israel repay the new government? By attacking and occupying Syrian land. And you have locals in the area saying, we demand that the Israelis withdraw completely. Now, Ahmed al-Shaara did touch on this, but very briefly during the convention. And there's going to be a point where the Syrian government, or Syrian people are going to say, we want answers. What happens if individual Syrians decide to take up arms and attack Israeli soldiers? Well, how will Ahmed al-Shaara respond to this? This was a huge mistake on the part of the Israelis. And your question about, if I understood correctly, basically outsourcing this to the Israelis, the Americans, I think, have already done so.
Have already done so? Julie, let me ask you, Fadi Aliso, your thoughts on this. What's going to happen in the south of Syria? What's going to happen in those areas that are near the Golan Heights?
I'm glad that you asked me about this, and I think we are facing a very unfortunate situation that is the accumulated result of the shameful position of the international community towards what happened in Gaza, giving the Israeli green card to do whatever they want in Gaza or Lebanon, has led them to expand also in Syria. If Benjamin Netanyahu continues to see himself that no one can put him in his position again, they will continue these aggressive actions against Syrian territories. We know that they have dreams of expanding Israeli borders, and this is a very shameful position when Syria needs all the support that it can get from its friends and allies around the world. We haven't seen anyone condemning these actions, while we know very well that Syria currently makes no threats to anyone, not to Israel, not to any of its regional neighbors. All we want now is to recover from this deadly civil war that just destroyed the country for 14 years. All we want now, our own time to grieve our losses, to rebuild our country. We are not interested in engaging in any regional wars. So just Israel needs to understand that these actions needs to stop. The Druze don't need protection from the Israeli. They are Syrians that are protected by the Syrians. No one from the Druze community asked for Israelis' intervention and protection. They are not facing any threat at all at the first place. And I think a lot of our of the Druze local leaders in the last few days have condemned these talks by Netanyahu and declared very well that they are Syrians, they belong to Syria, they don't need anyone's intervention. We need our own internal local dialogue process to take its extent, and we need some time to recover. So the last thing Syria needs is an Israeli intervention like this.
Julian Barnes-Dacey, I know that Israel was on the agenda this Wednesday where you are in Brussels. Is there pushback from the European Council, from the European Commission?
So there was an EU-Israeli meeting this week. Syria was not really part of the agenda, and obviously there are kind of wider, big issues related to the conflict in Gaza and the situation with the Palestinians. I think Europeans have stated their kind of opposition to the Israeli occupation of further Syrian land. They don't believe that ongoing Israeli strikes are constructive, and I think they share the sentiment that Israel is missing an opportunity here, given that the new Syrian leadership has been more conciliatory in its approach towards Syria and not looking for a broader conflict.
Jade Galahad, there's a term that I saw used at Tuesday's conference, transitional justice. What do you understand by transitional justice?
I mean, I think the concept itself is not well understood at the moment. I mean, across the country and also outside. For me, it's really to ensure that there are legal frameworks that are enabling peace, dialogue, justice, that you have the right instruments to judge people based on a situation that was very complex, because the war crimes have been lingering all across the countries from so many different parties. So you need a specific approach to bring people into a peaceful situation. And we have seen similar cases in Rwanda or some countries, in Colombia also. So I think it's proper to every country, and it's crucial for Syria, because for me it's one of the most important steps.
Yeah, because the last time you came on, we were talked about two tracks. There's the track of how you bring to justice those who've committed atrocities, and also the track of how deep do you purge. Has the conversation moved since then? Has it moved in the last month?
I mean, I don't feel like it has really moved in terms of instruments or in terms of means. At least now there's an official declaration from the interim government that it's being taken into account. Last time I think I was there, I'm not sure it was addressed. I think the first speech was going to happen the day after or something. At least now they're talking about it, but still for me it's still not very clear what's the plan, how we're going to do it. And I kind of understand that the situation is so chaotic right now that it's hard to come up with a holistic approach to tackle all the issues that are so numerous in the country. But I understand that, yeah, it's on the table, but for me it's not clear what the plan is.
Is it a pipe dream, or is it realistic to ask for a South African-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for instance?
I mean, I don't know if this is the best example to follow, and I'm not sure this is... I mean, we need a Syrian framework. We don't want to import something that was built in another context. It's really important that we have some experts that can support from different countries, but there definitely needs to be a local solution. We don't want to import something that was done in another country.
Fadi Haliso, what's the conversation in the civil society, and what's the conversation that you've had with the regime in Damascus about this?
I think this is one of the toughest files we will be facing in the future, because violations were committed by everyone. And to have transitional justice means that you need to have people accountable for all the from all the parties. And this is proving to be challenging, but I hope that we will come to this. People need answers, and need to see some accountability to what happened. We need to see accountability for the 120,000 detainees who disappeared, who were killed in the regime's prisons. We need to have accountability for the people whose homes were destroyed. We need to find accountability for everyone who lost someone. I'm very fully aware that in such context, it is not possible to sue and imprison hundreds of thousands of violators, that we need to have some kind of reconciliation at the end, and only limited numbers of people will be imprisoned at the end.
And on that score, Fadi, let me ask you this, Fadi, on that score, what's the model that's the most being talked about?
There are, as Jade mentioned, we have a lot of models to inspire from, whether Rwanda or South Africa. I know the German government has offered its support and expertise also on this level. I need here to say that although we need to have our own model, but I'm afraid sometimes this is an excuse used by many to refuse help or support from the outside or the international community, or to we heard Bashar al-Assad for years talking about our own Syrian model of democracy, and what we haven't, but and other detention centers. So we need to be also modest, acknowledge the international communities and the world progress on basic concepts such as democracy and transitional justice. Inspire from other models, yes, but also we shouldn't shy away from concepts like democracy and transitional justice just because they were invented in the West or outside of Syria.
Adnan Nasser, what's the most pragmatic solution to this, to having justice for those who've been the victims of atrocities?
Well, I think this is going to have to be a Syrian-led initiative. I've spoken with Syrian civil society groups and said that this will take a very long process. And if we're going to use the model of South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation, may I just point out, that would mean someone like Ahmed al-Shaara and his compatriots, those who were involved in the war. Let's not forget he's also a combatant. What's the chances of him going in front of a judge or speaking in front of the Syrian people and saying, I did this, my organization, my militia committed these atrocities? There are people in Syria who still see him as a war criminal, as someone who really shouldn't even be in the position that he's in. So if we're going to use that example, he's going to have to step in front of a judge himself.
And we'll have to leave it there for now. Adnan Nasser, many thanks for joining us from Beirut. I want to thank Julian Barnes-Dacey for being with us from Barcelona, not Brussels. I said Brussels, but I meant Barcelona, of course. Fadi Haliso in Damascus, Jade Kahay, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.